Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolute game changer happening right now on the ground. For the longest time, everybody's focus has been on territorial gains, just moving lines on a map. But if we actually look closer, something far more structural is taking place. We're going to examine the deliberate severing of Russia's southern railway. And look, this isn't just a road or a convenience, it is the absolute central nervous system of their entire southern occupation. Every single bullet, every fuel tanker, every drone component entirely relies on this one lifeline. If you pull this thread, the whole tapestry of the southern front just begins to unravel. So today we're going to look at exactly how this massive war machine is being systematically starved.
Let's pull up our roadmap real quick. We are going to dissect this collapse in 5 specific stages: the central nervous system, dismantling the organism, achieving fire control, striking the source, and finally, the cascading collapse. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the central nervous system. To really wrap our heads around this collapse, we first have to recognize that the ultimate objective on the battlefield isn't necessarily just capturing cities. An incredible shift happened across a massive 400 square kilometer zone. A relatively narrow breach, just 10 to 12 kilometers wide, completely shattered Russia's deep defense network in the south. The force that was supposed to be holding that ground, the 58th Combined Arms Army, entirely lost its ability to advance. Suddenly, they found themselves in total chaos, fighting simply to avoid being overrun. And they were literally forced to retreat back across rivers they had spent months trying to secure. You see, in modern warfare, depth is everything. When a 10-kilometer puncture happens in exactly the right place, you don't just lose 10 kilometers of dirt. You rupture the logistical vacuum behind the lines, paralyzing forces across the wider front, because their supply laders are completely cut. And our sources use this brilliant biological metaphor that explains it perfectly. The land bridge connecting the Russian mainland to Crimea through occupied southern Ukraine is essentially a living system. It's an organism. All of these interconnected components, the fuel depots, ammunition storage, communications, energy grids, and the air defense umbrella, they rely entirely on each other. If you take out the energy, the communications fail. If you take out the air defense, well, the fuel depots are suddenly exposed. In complex military networks like this, degraded systems don't just fail gradually on some linear scale. They fail exponentially, all at once, the exact moment the last redundancy is removed. Moving on to part 2, dismantling the organism, blinding the enemy. So before cutting the physical artery, you have to blind the enemy, right? The real catalyst here came in early February 2026, when SpaceX eliminated Russian access to illicitly obtained Starlink terminals. And man, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entire digital communications infrastructure that Russia had built up across the front line collapsed instantly. When a modern army loses its digital nervous system, everything grinds to a halt. Infiltrator embedded behind enemy lines lost absolutely all contact with their command. Artillery coordination, which entirely relies on real-time data feeds, just completely broke down. And most critically, drone operators lost the high-speed connectivity that made their targeting possible in the first place. They went completely suddenly blind. With the enemy's communications severed, Ukraine was free to unleash a highly mobile, downright brutal 3-stage tactical cycle. They deployed these hunter squads of 12 to 20 soldiers, running an incredibly precise sequence. First, reconnaissance drones identify the target. Then, FPV drones deliver the first strike. And finally, the hunter platoon moves in to complete the elimination. Because the Russian forces were entirely disconnected, unable to call for artillery support or even share situational awareness, this entire kill chain sequence was running from start to finish in a matter of minutes, without any coordinated counter-response whatsoever.
The sheer disorientation on the ground was just profound. I mean, listen to this. A battalion commander from Ukraine's 95th Airborne Assault Brigade noted that after his paratroopers infiltrated behind the lines, destroyed reconnaissance drones, and surrounded roughly 60 soldiers, the Russian positions didn't even realize they were encircled until a full week later. Just think about the implications of that for a second. An army that literally cannot detect its own encirclement isn't actively defending a position or carrying out a strategy. It's stranded in an information vacuum, basically just waiting to be eliminated.
Which brings us to part 3, achieving fire control, the tipping point. Now, this is the tipping point of the entire operation. The absolutely crucial concept here is fire control. Military planners know you don't actually need to physically stand on the railway tracks with infantry to control them. You simply have to deny the enemy the ability to use that space. The ultimate choke point here is the M14 highway and the parallel railway network around Melitopol.
Once Ukraine pushed the front line forward, those routes came right into the reliable strike range of HIMARS and FPV drones, meaning every single Russian tanker, troop transport, and ammunition train trying to supply the southern front instantly became a sitting duck. And Ukraine didn't just passively hold this newly gained ground. No, they instantly converted the recaptured 400 kilometers into a highly efficient layered kill machine. Look at the sheer speed of this teardown. 40 Russian communication antennas wiped out in February, another 22 in just the first week of March alone. They systematically hunted down the drone coordination nodes, tearing away whatever tiny bit of situational awareness the enemy had left. Any attempt by Russian forces to counterattack and reclaim this territory was just channeled directly into prepared concrete killing zones.
All right, part 4, striking the source, the deep strike campaign.
As the front line crumbled, that tactical failure started bleeding deep into the Russian rear. We saw this rapid, highly synchronized deep strike campaign targeting the very production sources feeding the war machine. This wasn't random at all. It was a methodical dismantling of capability. On March 7th, an ATACMS strike hit the occupied Donetsk airbase. 3 days later, on March 10th, a strike hit the Crimea microelectronics factory deep in Bryansk. And by March 18th, multiple air defense systems, fuel depots, and communications towers were completely dismantled in a single operation series.
Let's just look at the staggering scale of destruction from that first March 7th strike alone. By using ballistic missiles to deliberately overload the processing capability of the S-400 radar systems for just a handful of seconds, Ukrainian cruise missiles slipped right through the blind spots and hit the reinforced hangars. Between 600 and 800 fully fueled Shahad drones were vaporized. 40 tons of explosives and thousands of liters of jet fuel triggered a massive secondary blast that practically leveled the surrounding infrastructure. In literally mere seconds, $40 million in ready-to-launch combat munitions were wiped out before a single drone could even threaten a Ukrainian city. But, you know, that March 10th strike might actually be the fatal blow for the long term. The Crimea factory produced 90 to 94% of Russia's precision military electronics. We're talking the critical guidance systems for ballistic missiles and the core modules for radar. When this factory was halted, it created an immediate bottleneck across every single Russian weapon system. This isn't just a factory shutting down, folks. It is the digital brains of their entire arsenal going offline. And the systemic problem for them is that there are simply no international replacement options available. Sanctions strictly block the import of equivalent components. Allies like Iran and North Korea entirely lack the technical manufacturing capacity for microelectronics of this specific grade. And China remains completely unwilling to risk severe secondary sanctions by supplying these parts through official channels. The source was decisively cut off.
Finally, part 5, the cascading collapse, the terminal diagnosis.
You literally can't hide logistical failures of this magnitude from the public forever, and it's now creating massive shockwaves back home. The political and social consequences are flowing through Russian society in ways state media simply can no longer contain. Take Ilya Remezlov, a loyalist lawyer and professional informant for years. He published a manifesto calling Putin illegitimate and straight up demanding criminal prosecution. This manifesto spread to millions of Russians across Telegram before Remezlov was abruptly placed in a psychiatric hospital. When loyalists inside the system start turning publicly like that, it's a glaring symptom of deep domestic political fracture. And independent polling from the Levada Center actually reflects this shift, showing definite support for the war plummeting to below 30% today.
And then we hit the demographic wall, 46 to 52. That is the shocking new average age of Russian soldiers killed or wounded at the front. The demographic reality of this conflict is becoming completely unsustainable. The massive signing bonuses have basically collapsed as the regional war budgets run dry, severely highlighting that willing volunteers just no longer exist in sufficient numbers. The core fighting demographic has been heavily depleted, forcing the military to pull from much older generations, and even bringing in over 18,000 foreign mercenaries to try and artificially fill this massive personnel void.
Let's look at the hard numbers here, because the math is just brutal, and the recruitment deficit is becoming a severe crisis. In December 2025, the military lost nearly 6,000 more troops than it recruited. In January 2026, that deficit grew to 8,600. The army is consuming men significantly faster than it can find them, and the mathematical gap is visually widening every single month. It's a simple equation of attrition that a logistics network already completely starved of resources just cannot solve.
And that brings us to the ultimate fate of this starved organism. It's a condition military planners call culmination. Culmination is the exact moment a military force exhausts its physical and moral capacity to sustain operations.
With the Southern Rail Lifeline under constant threat of fire control, transport trains regularly struck, and critical ammunition simply failing to arrive, the entire southern occupation is literally starving. Every single day that the rail functions at a degraded capacity, it pushes the Russian forces closer to this exact threshold of total systemic exhaustion.
So the real panic inside the command structures isn't about a single lost position or a single bombed factory. It is the terrifying recognition that the very system holding everything together is coming apart at the seams, and there is absolutely no viable plan for what comes next. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. What actually happens when a nuclear superpower's army simply runs out of the ability to function? It's a totally unprecedented reality, and we are watching it unfold in real time. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.